welcome back to the RBL Podcast. And well, we're back today for a bit of a short episode. We're not going to be talking about the draft, we're just going to be purely focusing on the playoffs and how things are sort of happening, and giving my reflections on some epic Game 7s that happened over yesterday's sim, as well as talk about a bit of a mini preview for the conference finals coming up, and what do I think each team kind of needs to do to be successful to get themselves into that elusive RBL finals. So let's begin. I think with I think we probably need to go and talk a little bit about the Spurs and the Hawks game before we dive into those Game 7s, and just give a bit of a reflection in terms of how that panned out. So obviously, I think at the time I last recorded this, I think the Spurs were sort of ahead 3-0 or so. The Hawks put up a really, really strong comeback though, and really did give them a good attempt and a good run for their money, really, and some really, really interesting performances. We'll just jump forward a little bit and talk about that. So, the Hawks did a bit of a rejig, I think, in terms of their strategy. Really, really put the Spurs on the back foot, really, for a couple of games, and it looked like at 3-2 that this might be going to a Game 7. The likes of Eddie Johnson and John Drew and co were really, really holding the fort, really, and really pushing this Spurs team all the way. Gervin was starting to sort of show signs that he wasn't putting up 30 points plus a game, which is interesting. And we kind of looked at this as we got towards the that period, particularly in this game where Gervin was 9-21, and you're kind of asking yourself, is this a case of Hawks fighting back against one of the premier teams in the RBL? But it wasn't to be the case. The Spurs did come out on top in the end, albeit through really, really strong defensive play. John Drew only managing 18 minutes was probably the key deciding factor in this one, as well as Tree Rowland sort of going down injured, which meant that basically the Spurs went through 4-2, obviously into that conference finals. So we'll talk a little bit about them in a minute and what we think are their prospects kind of going forward in that final, in conference finals. But let's talk a little bit about the Hawks. So the Hawks, I think, are in a really, really good shape, though. It's fair to say. This roster is really nicely positioned for next year. You've got the likes of Eddie Johnson, a real elite point guard now, and it's certainly shown in the playoffs that he is a very, very good playoff player now. These numbers were looking really, really good. He did sort of jump in the playoffs, so demonstrated good performance there. We talked about John Drew before, and sort of said that he is definitely one of the best sort of wing players in the league already at the age of 23. And then obviously, Tree Rowland sort of holding out the front court. This is a really, really nice trio. I think the big question for this team going into the off-season is, what do they do about Scott Wedman? Obviously they weren't able to get him re-signed. He has actually proven himself to be a really, really efficient sort of second scoring option, I would say, taking off some of that load. Are they going to try and keep him? Would be the question I'd be asking. I would say, personally, they need to look to try and re-sign him. He's obviously got 3 years experience. He's got bird years on his side, I believe. So he looks like he could be re-signed, hopefully at a nice price for the Hawks. That being said, though, I mean, the rest of the roster is pretty much status quo next year. We could talk about Earl Monroe sort of coming back, and hopefully he'll be healthy. He looked really, really strong when he was playing before the injuries. This team is nicely positioned. I think there's some gaps in the front court. I mean, the question really is, Steve Hawes' minutes, are you going to bring him back, or are you going to find someone else? But the team has cap room. I mean, we don't know exactly what the cap status is going to be going into the off-season, and we'll probably talk about that as we get there. But currently at 1.2 million, this team has some money to throw around, really. If they can get Wedman back with maybe a front court player, and maybe find themselves a little bargain, this team is certainly going to be much better than that 45-win record next year, I think, just because of the natural development of the likes of Eddie Johnson, Tree Rowlands, and John Drew. So I am really, really excited about this team going forward. I think this Hawks team is sort of starting to show signs that it could be a contender next year, and really, really put in a strong performance against the San Antonio Spurs. But let's talk a little bit about the Game 7s that we had, because we had some absolutely fire games happening in this second round, really. And I think I'm going to start with the 76ers Knicks game, and then we'll talk about the Pistons Blazers. So for those who've been following along, the 76ers Knicks went back and forth really throughout the whole series, and it was down to a Game 7, the final game in Philadelphia. And I guess surprisingly, the New York Knicks came out on top in that one. And let me just try and jump my way through to where that game is. Here we go. So, probably most people didn't have the 76ers down to lose this one. But it was really down to the front court play of the New York Knicks, I think, that got this one over the line. In particular, you had Chuck Robinson and Bob McAdoo playing heavy minutes, putting up really, really strong numbers. 54 points, 20 rebounds between them, 7 assists and a couple of blocks. So that front court Knicks roster of those two really, really did put the hammer down and probably got this one over the line for them. I think it's worth shouting out, though, Chris Ford has actually had a surprisingly good couple of games for the Knicks, particularly in the Game 6 as well. So, I think the Knicks will go into this one going forward thinking that they, it's always a dice roll Game 7, but it was definitely that front court play that got them over the line. That being said, talking about the 76ers, let's jump over to their roster and talk a little bit about their prospects going forward. So obviously, this team was expected to be a finals team, I think, this year. It's fair to say they're in great shape. They've got some absolutely incredible players. Dawkins and McGuinness in sort of the front court. Irving's, coming into his prime now. World be free. Ricky Sobers was obviously the trade they kind of made through the deadline. And when we start to look at this team, 58 wins last year. It's all locked down to all come back next year. They're probably going to be around the salary cap, I would imagine, at 1.267. So there's not going to be much room for manoeuvre to bring in any sort of superstar unless there is a trade that happens. For me, I think this team is going to go back and win between 55 and 60 games again this year. Just because you've got the likes of Darryl Dawkins is probably going to develop again. At the age of 20, he's already putting up really, really, really good numbers for them. Kind of want a bit more scoring out of him, if I'm being honest, but looking good. Obviously, Julius Irving is going to continue to be one of the best players in the league, so there's no surprising he's going to come back and be electric. I think the question for me, if I'm sitting there as a 76ers, is obviously Game 7 is always a dice roll. If they'd have got through this one, we'd be talking about a really fascinating matchup with Irving against Gervin in sort of the conference finals. I guess for me, I think the question is Ricky Sobers the right person to kind of lead this team going forward and really sort of be that additional player? I don't know, to be honest with you. When we take a little look at his playoff averages, he's kind of not really stepped up. His shooting's been pretty awful. When you compare that to his regular season, it did drop off. So there's a question mark there. I don't necessarily think he's the right player for this team. If I'm sitting there and I'm the 76ers, I'm probably sitting and thinking, Mike Dunleavy's probably going to take the handing role. I think he's probably going to go into that natural point guard role going next season. Again, he's probably going to develop. He's a youngster at 24. So if he can get some of those handing ability up, he's going to jump into that. And then it kind of leaves, does Sobers go down to a 6-man role? He probably could do that effectively. But do you want to trade in cash in these chips to maybe get something else? That would be my question. I don't really see them doing any other major moves beyond that, just given the contract set up for them is quite nice. They've got another year of Dawkins on a decent salary, World be free on a decent salary, before they're going to have to start paying out these guys. And obviously George McInnes has got his mega contract coming. There's not much room for manoeuvre in terms of the salary cap. If they do, they're going to have to go beyond that. Obviously, we'll see what the team budgets and things look like. But I'm talking about minor things here because this 76ers team is still going to be a contender next year. Everyone's coming back. Nobody's really on that point where they're going to age much. No one really that's materially important to them. So this team is definitely going to be back and definitely going to be a contender next year. They just got unlucky with the Game 7, really, in my opinion. But let's jump ourselves over to the Trailblazers Pistons game, because this one also was, I guess, a shocking one for most people, because I think going into this, the Trailblazers had a bit of a bumpy, it's fair to say a bumpy round one. Getting through against the Suns, just about being a game down. Have had injury issues all through their series in this, and we've been Will Walton coming back and playing heavy minutes. Most people kind of assumed that the Trailblazers would have enough to beat a Pistons team. And let's not forget, this Pistons team is meant to be rebuilding at this moment in time. So, certainly an uptick in terms of surprise here. Walton obviously had a phenomenal game again. He's 18 and 17. But, the rest of the team kind of didn't stand up to the mark, really. I mean, Lionel Hollins had a good game. Maurice Lucas had one of his worst games of the playoff series. And Johnny Davis was pretty awful in shooting as well. turn it over to, Bob Lanier basically gave Bill Walton a bit of a seeing to, I think, to be fair. Walton had a strong game, but Lanier, 30 points, 14 rebounds, 2 blocks is phenomenal for a star centre. So Lanier's really carrying this team. But there's a guy in there, Eric Money, who has really, really, really started to sort of demonstrate that he is going to be a very good player in this league. His receiving averages have looked good, and for a guy who's meant to be a yellow, just a starter essentially, he's looked really good. 6 assists, 21 points, really took on the second part of the scoring load, which is surprising. And I guess shifting Kevin Porter over the shooting guard meant that it freed up minutes for him. And, well, the Pistons, it was an ugly series in terms of defense. Everyone, there wasn't much effective offense being played, but the Pistons got the job done, and they are moving into the conference finals, which is definitely a surprise, I think, for most pundits looking at this. But in terms of the Blazers, we go and sort of have a little look at them. And I think when we look at this roster, this team won 48 games this year. They had injury issues all the way through. This is the one where I have the most question marks as to what this Blazers team is going to look like next year. They've obviously got lots of contract decisions to be made. Bill Walton is going into free agency. Maurice Lucas is going into free agency. So that front court is either going to get massively paid or it's going to be a completely different front court. We will see how that goes. Sam Lacey obviously is also going into free agency. A lot of big decisions to be made by this team. You've still got Hollins and Davis, sort of the backcourt's kind of secured at the minute. And they will have cap room. It just depends whether they re-sign these guys. Let's assume Walton and Lucas come back and they're being paid 200,000 each. That basically takes them up, but they're still going to have room to play with. So they may, if they play this right, this Trailblazers team could jump from a 48 win team to a 55, 60 win team if they can find that additional star to kind of add to this piece, really. And then obviously the question is going to be a case of, can they keep Bill Walton healthy? If they can keep him healthy through a playoff series, which they obviously didn't happen, he came back and he kind of made a bit of a stamp. If they can do that, then this team is going to be strong again. But there's a lot of questions outstanding from this team going into the off season. Lots of things are going to have to happen. Lots of decisions that need to be made, and the Trailblazers they've either lost their chance here in terms of winning it all, or maybe they're going to come back stronger. It's a sort of, for me, I think it's a 50-50 split as to how that looks. But let's turn our attention now to the conference finals, and let's start with the Spurs-Knicks series, and then we'll finish with the Lakers-Pistons. So for me, the Spurs-Knicks series is going to be really, really fascinating. Obviously, most people expected the 76ers to kind of get through, and in terms of what I think this series is going to come down to, it's basically going to come down to, can the New York Knicks stop this man? If they can stop George Gervin, they will have a shot at the series. But that is a huge ask. I mean, he is the MVP. He is been absolutely electrically phenomenal in the regular season and in the playoffs. I mean, his playoff numbers have just jumped to be something absolutely ludicrous. I mean, 39 minutes, 36 points, nearly 50% field goal effectiveness. Is terrifying, to be perfectly honest with you. So for me, I think from the Knicks' perspective, the way they're going to win this game is can they get that front court of McAdoo and Chuck Robinson working effectively like they did against the 76ers. If they can do that and at the same time stop George Gervin, then they have a shot. For the Spurs, they basically just need to continue moving forward. Dan Roundfield has been a bit of a revelation for them. He's looked really, really good in this playoff series. His numbers have looked efficient. He's kind of been doing a bit of everything. Good pickup for them in sort of the regular season. It's going to be a question. Can Billy Ports slow down the likes of McAdoo? I think there's enough defensive ability to probably do that. And then it's just a case of, can they just get George Gervin going off? If he can score 36 points a night, this team is going to be really, really hard to stop. And it could be a very quick series if that happens. So for me, I think it's obviously still the Spurs to lose, and that's kind of the preview. I think optimistically, being the Knicks GM, I think hopefully it'll go to like 6 games or something. If we can nick 1 or 2 on the road or 1 at home, that would be a decent prospect. But I think the Spurs definitely the one that I would expect to go through in that series. And then we turn over to probably the David versus Goliath of the semi-finals. Just given where we know the Pistons are meant to be rebuilding, but somehow they've tactically been astute and have found themselves into this position. and they come up against probably an absolute juggernaut, probably the best team we are going to see in the RBL for a while. 73-9 in the regular season. This team had no problem whatsoever getting through their second round matchup, basically completely sweeping themselves through. And the Lakers, for me, it's just for them to win the series, they've just got to continue what they're doing. I mean, they're the best defensive team, one of the best offensive teams. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has looked really, really good in the playoffs. He hasn't even had to play major minutes, which is crazy scary that we haven't even seen them have to up the minutes of their rotation to kind of get themselves through. James Edwards has looked really good. Norm Nixon has looked phenomenal as a rookie. This team has everything really. So there's an uphill battle for the Pistons. And so what do I think the Pistons need to do to kind of get through this? Obviously, thinking about it, Bob Lanier is going to have to continue to be one of the best players in the playoff series. I mean, he's going to have to continue to put up these really, really good numbers that he's been doing, upping that game. If he can continue to do that, put Kareem on the back stall, force them to have to play Kareem some heavy minutes, maybe we could see a bit more of a nudge to the Pistons. But, Lanier's going to have to play well. They're going to have to slow Kareem down. They're going to have to slow Norm Nixon down. They're going to have to slow Wilkes down. There's a lot of players on that Lakers team they're going to have to try and slow down. Does this Pistons team have enough? I mean, it's going to be really fascinating to see how it works because, on paper, it looks like a complete mismatch. But this Pistons team seems to have got cohesion, seems to be blending really well. Hopefully the likes of Kevin Porter can finally sort of step up. They need Eric Money to continue playing this phenomenal basketball he's been playing through the season, really, in the hope that he can slow Norm Nixon down. He's got the defensive ability to do it. So maybe that'll work in their favour. But, likes of Barnes and Douglas are going to have to really step up their game. I mean, it doesn't look like they can at the moment. But if they can get defence and play really, really good defence and turn it into an absolute slugfest, like they did against the Trailblazers, they've proven that they can beat a team with a dominant centre in the Trailblazers. Obviously, the Lakers have a little bit more around them than the Trailblazers and Walton does. If they can just make it into that defensive slugfest, really, really difficult game each and every night, under 100 points, maybe the Pistons could come out on top. But for me, I think I'm going to struggle to see this one going beyond 6 games. I think the Lakers will just come out on top. I just think there's just too much talent, too much ability. Everyone's healthy. They haven't had to play heavy minutes, and they just dismantled the Warriors with ease. I think it's going to be a real tough one. So yeah, for me, I think conference finals, I could see the Spurs going through and the Lakers going through, which is not surprising given they were both the number 1 and number 2 in the rankings throughout the whole season. And it's going to be an epic finals matchup, and if we get there. But, the Knicks and the Pistons are certainly not going to want that, and we'll see how it kind of plays out over the coming sort of week or so. But best of luck to every single GM that's in this conference finals and semi-finals. Hopefully we have to see some fun games, some good matchups like we did in the second round here. And we'll see who goes forward into the RBL finals. But for those of you who've been waiting patiently, I should just give a shout out in terms of the draft. The draft details are just going to be posted up shortly over the coming next few days. So you'll start to see some of those player ratings and everything, and you can start thinking about the draft as well for those of you who are sort of waiting for that off-season to begin. But yeah, can't wait. I can't wait to see how this conference final plays out. First games of today. Who knows what happens, but yeah, as I said, best of luck to everyone, and we'll see who enters into that RBL final.